Hello, I'm Adam Wren.
And I'm Dasha Burns. It is Thursday, August 14th.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. Good morning, Dasha.
Good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Let's get right to what's driving the day.
Let's do it.
First up, we have an exclusive interview in this morning's playbook that you're going to want to read for both its 2028 implications and for a better sense of how opinions within the Democratic Party are shifting on Israel and Gaza. Recently, former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg made an appearance on the influential Pod Save America podcast, after which he caught incoming fire over his response to a question about Gaza, an answer which critics thought was especially mealy-mouthed.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Adam, because Buttigieg is known for being such an excellent communicator and really being able to distill and help digest some of these really complicated topics. So I was surprised by the story, but it looks like he's trying to do a little bit of cleanup and clarifying, and he is doing that with you, my friend. You talked to him, so I'm so curious to hear what his message was on take two on this question.
Yeah, he sort of acknowledged that he wasn't as clear as he could have been. He said, quote, "I get it," end quote. He said, quote, "It's important to be clear about something this enormous and this painful. It's just that it's so enormous and it's so painful that sometimes words can fail." Essentially, I asked him the same questions that the Pod Save hosts asked him, whether or not, if he was a member of the Senate, that he would have voted against sending additional arms to Israel. And he said, yes, he would have voted against that. I asked him where he was at on naming Palestine as a state, and he essentially said that he thought just words on a paper didn't have a lot of meaning, but he thought it should be a negotiated process. And then also asked him just about how he was processing these images out of Gaza as the father of 4-year-old twins. And he spoke about it in very visceral terms, Dasha. And so, fascinating interview. And I think an example of how this is probably going to be the main foreign policy question, maybe the first foreign policy question at the 2028 Democratic debates.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be a major fault line. And I do wonder, I mean, for folks like Buttigieg who are trying to walk this line, like, do you think that this answer, which did go further and was slightly clearer than his first round here, do you think that's going to be satisfying to these different coalitions in the party?
It's hard to say. It's interesting because when he spoke initially to the PodSafe guys over the weekend, he used a metaphor and talked about Israel as like a friend who's doing something that's potentially harmful to themselves, harmful to others, and harmful to you if they're your friend. And that metaphor is something that he talked about in 2019 with the very same audience when he went to the J Street Forum. This is a pro-two-state solution group of influencers. And he used that same metaphor then, and it really worked well in 2019. But you fast forward 6 years later, I asked somebody who was in the room in 2019 at J Street what they thought of this friendship metaphor now in light of October 7th and all that's happened. They said, quote, "When your friend kills 60,000 people and starves an entire population for months at a time, shouldn't the question be, why the expletive am I friends with this guy?"
It's a mess really in both parties at this point. Like, there is no clear party platform and clear party answer either for Democrats or Republicans here, right? But I think for Democrats, there's just a lot more pressure from parts of the base around it.
Yeah, I'm just really curious to see how this all plays out. So we reached out to Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, who's had a pretty consistent position on this, has been critical of Netanyahu routinely.
But supportive of Israel, yeah.
Yeah, but he, through a spokesperson, declined to comment on the story. Also, Maryland Governor Wes Moore declined to comment. And so it's interesting because the Democratic senators who are exposed to this and exposed to votes on this are sort of more out there than the Democratic gubernatorial candidates who can kind of stay insulated.
It's like, if I don't have to step in hot water, like, I'm not going to, right?
Yeah, that's right. So certainly something I think that we'll be talking about for a long time. And, Dasha mirrors some of the same divides on the MAGA right.
Absolutely. This is going to be an issue that's not going to go away, certainly not as long as this conflict continues to boil over.
The second big story in Washington right now is all about tomorrow's summit in Alaska between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. We've talked a fair bit about this, Dasha, and sort of the hands-on approach that the president takes in these big moments. And yesterday we heard him in a call with European leaders reportedly saying that he will push for an unconditional ceasefire in Ukraine during the meeting with Putin. And according to CNN, said that any territory swaps with Ukraine are not for him to negotiate, which gave European officials the impression that he wouldn't entertain any Russian proposals to get control of swaths of Ukraine. What are you hearing from the White House about this, Dasha?
I don't know that the European interpretation is necessarily spot on. I mean, one thing that White House officials have signaled to me is that they are by no means expecting to walk out of there with a deal in hand. They know that this can't and shouldn't happen without Ukraine at the table. The goal is for Trump to really just suss out where Putin is. And he's continued to say, according to my White House sources, as recently as yesterday, that he could know 2 seconds in where this is headed or where Putin stands and what is and what isn't possible. So I think without knowing the details of what exactly was said in that meeting, I think that ultimately what it's going to come down to is what Trump feels like in the moment. But I think he and his team have made pretty clear that there's nothing firm that's going to come out of this. They want progress. They want a clearer sense of what is possible to achieve, but they're not looking to walk out of there with anything firm in hand.
Do you think that the White House's expectations have increased since we reported that they were setting expectations very modestly?
I think there's optimism given the signals that they've been receiving from the Russians. And it does seem like there's been sort of a shift and a little bit more willingness to get serious about this. So I think there's optimism, but I don't know the details of what was said in that meeting. And of course, there's some reporting out there, and we're chasing more details on that meeting with the Europeans in Ukraine. But I think the posture internally and publicly has still remained pretty hesitant in terms of trying to set any real expectations, certainly not high ones.
Yeah, certainly something we're going to watch. I spoke with John Bolton, the former Trump national security advisor, this week, and he told me there's no real parallel historically to a summit like this. So, quite a gripping moment.
Absolutely. And the White House is very much aware of that.
And the third big thing that we're following today, Dasha, is White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles being behind President Donald Trump's highly unusual decision last week to rehire a vaccine regulator he just fired at the urging of MAGA influencer Laura Loomer. Dasha, what can you tell us about this story that you and our colleagues David Lim and Tim Rohn reported out?
Yeah, so we've been digging into what happened here because it is such an unusual sort of back and forth and whiplash from the White House on a personnel decision like this. I mean, usually when you're fired, you're you're fired here. But in this case, as you well know, Adam, Laura Loomer went to the White House, went to the president, made the case that Vinay Prasad, who's at the FDA, was insufficiently loyal, made the argument that he should be ousted. Now, RFK Jr., HHS Secretary, and Marty Makary, the head of the FDA, really did not want him gone. The president did it anyway. Now, this came at the same time as there was some criticism from a pharmaceutical company over the pulling of a drug by the FDA. And there are a lot of mixed interests in this. And what we learned is that Susie Wiles played a significant role in helping the president understand what was fact and what was fiction. And she worked with RFK Jr. and with Marty Makary to bring the president back on board with bringing Vinay Prasad back to the FDA. Now, there are a number of reasons why this is so important. I mean, first of all, it shows all of the different sort of factions and pressures around the White House, and it kind of illustrates some of the limits of Laura Loomer's influence and impact. I mean, there is this like legend of Loomer that has been, I think, really floating around the internet and throughout the media. And she certainly speaks with the president. The president likes her and is somebody that does tend to have an impact. But you've still got Susie Wiles in there. You've still got other sort of adults in the room that are going to make their voices heard with the president as well. And it's just fascinating to watch how, especially when it comes to Susie, she is not going to gatekeep. She's not going to say, don't see or talk to Laura Loomer, right? Like there are a lot of people that think that's how she should handle things. She always says, I'm not going to manage the president, but she will manage the chaos around him. And this is an example of her doing just that.
The Ice Maiden.
The Ice Maiden, indeed. She strikes again.
And as always, we like to end the show with something from the Playbook newsletter. The New York Post reports First Lady Melania Trump is threatening to sue Hunter Biden for $1 billion after Biden alleged that she has ties to the disgraced financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Hunter Biden made the offending remarks on the YouTube show Channel 5 with Andrew Callahan. Trump is demanding Biden retract the statement. We'll be reporting more on this in the newsletter, so be sure to check it. And as always, send us your tips, birthdays, or spotted moments to playbook at politico.com. Dasha, thanks as always.
Thanks for listening.
And that's all for today's Playbook Podcast. We have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great Thursday.